The strong also collapse, but in silence when no one is watching. According to Machiavelli, strength is not defined merely by power, wealth, or the ability to dominate others. True strength is resilience in the face of betrayal, the discipline to maintain composure when the world turns hostile, and the cold ability to act without emotion when emotion is a luxury one cannot afford. Yet even the strongest man, forged in solitude and pain, has moments when the weight becomes unbearable. And unlike the weak, who collapse loudly, demanding sympathy, the strong do it quietly, in the shadows, with dignity, with their back straight and their mouth shut. Machiavelli understood this intimately. He was not a man who idealized virtue, as the ancients did, but rather one who dissected it to expose its inner mechanics for him. Human nature was cruel, selfish, and treacherous. A prince, or any man seeking to thrive in a brutal world, had to possess virtue not in the moral sense, but in the capacity to adapt, to manipulate, to endure. He must wear masks, play roles, make sacrifices. And the greatest sacrifice of all is often his own humanity, his softness, his right to collapse. For the strong, collapsing is not a spectacle. It is a secret ritual performed in isolation. Imagine the general who loses a battle but must still smile to keep his army united. The CEO whose empire begins to crumble, yet he walks into meetings with perfect posture and steady hands. The father who feels empty inside but still wakes up every morning to feed his children and face the day. These are not stories of weakness. These are acts of hidden heroism. Machiavelli would not have called them saints, but he would have respected their mastery of appearances. He would have seen in them the highest expression of virtue, the capacity to bend without breaking publicly, because once a strong man breaks visibly, the vultures descend. Respect fades, power leaks away, so the collapse must be disguised as silence, solitude, or strategic withdrawal. And herein lies the tragedy of the strong, the very traits that make them admired: stoicism, control, resolve also isolate them. They do not ask for help, because asking implies weakness. They do not cry out, because their cries would shatter the myth others project onto them. They carry the pain alone, because they know that those who look too long into their suffering may use it against them. According to Machiavelli, the world is not merciful to those who bleed in the open. Power and pity do not coexist. One must choose to be feared or to be pitied, and those who wish to be feared or respected must bury their own suffering beneath layers of calm. But it never disappears. It festers. There is a price to be paid for silence. When no one sees the collapse, no one knows to reach out. The strong man is slowly erased not by defeat, but by neglect. His smile is accepted as truth, his calm mistaken for peace. And so, he fades not with drama, but with quiet resignation. The strong do not scream when they fall. They simply vanish from the stage one day. And people say, "He seemed fine." And this is the bitter brilliance of the Machiavellian worldview. It does not lie to you. It tells you the cost of power, of strength, of control. It shows you that the mask you wear to survive becomes the prison that hides your decay. To endure silently is noble, but it is also fatal when taken to the extreme. Machiavelli would advise, collapse if you must, but collapse strategically. Withdraw, like a lion licking its wounds, not a sheep crying for shelter. Choose when and where you break. Control your own downfall if you cannot prevent it. Never collapse when your enemies are watching. They will not offer you help. They will offer you a blade. But do not be deceived. Every strong man you admire has collapsed at some point, in a dark room, alone, perhaps drunk, perhaps numb. And then he rebuilt, in silence, without applause. This, too, is strength. The strong also collapse, but their collapse is an art. It is invisible. It is Machiavellian. And if you are strong, you know this already. You have mastered the art of silent suffering. You have smiled while breaking. You have stood tall while trembling. But remember, this silence must serve a purpose. Collapse only to rebuild stronger. Retreat only to return more dangerous. Rest not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Machiavelli never told you to be unbreakable. He told you to be unreadable. Your collapse must never be seen for what it is. It must look like a calculated pause, a deliberate retreat. Because in this world, no one saves you. You are the one you are waiting for. Collapse, then rise. But let no one see the moment in between. The strong also collapse, but they do so without witnesses, without confession, without the permission to be weak, not because they are invincible, but because they've learned that power does not allow public suffering. Power cannot coexist with visible pain. Machiavelli, the cold realist of power, would remind us that perception is as powerful as truth. If you look broken, you are broken. If you look weak, you become prey. Therefore, for those who wield influence, command respect, or carry responsibility, collapse must be hidden, timed, controlled. This is not a message of cruelty. It's a message of survival. In the world Machiavelli observed, one filled with betrayal, shifting alliances, and human selfishness, those who exposed their wounds were exploited. Those who cried out were dismissed, and those who appeared shaken were quickly replaced. A prince, a leader, a man of resolve must never show the cracks in his armor. He must let them deepen in silence and then mend them without spectacle. There is a strange kind of nobility in this quiet collapse. It is not dramatic. It does not call attention. It happens between long nights and early mornings, in solitary walks and unfinished thoughts. The strong do not collapse in front of crowds. They collapse in motion, continuing to fulfill their duties while their inner world crumbles. And no one notices. That is the tragedy and the triumph. You may be one of them. Perhaps no one sees what you're carrying. They praise your strength, your consistency, your resolve, but never ask how much of you is left behind the mask. You show up, do what is necessary, solve problems, and lead others, all while dragging an invisible weight. That is the kind of strength Machiavelli respected, not blind optimism, but ruthless endurance. He would not pity you. He would commend your discipline. He would say, "You understand the game." Because for Machiavelli, the game is everything. Life is not about fairness or emotional expression. It is about control, influence, and the long-term preservation of your position. When you collapse loudly, you lose that control. When you collapse privately, you retain your edge. And that edge, even when dulled, is what keeps you alive. But this raises a deeper, darker question. What happens when the strong never allow themselves to be seen? When they perform perfection so well that even those closest to them believe it? The answer is simple: they disappear. Their pain goes unnoticed until it consumes them. Their burnout becomes irreversible. Their silence is mistaken for stability. Until one day they are gone, and the world, confused, says, "But he seemed fine." This is the paradox of strength. You are needed, respected, maybe even admired, but you are also invisible. People rely on you, but they do not truly see you. They rest on the foundation of your quiet suffering. You are the fortress they lean on, never questioning what it costs to remain unshaken. And if you collapse, their world begins to wobble, so it is easier for them to pretend you are eternal. But you are not, and the longer you pretend, the more dangerous your silence becomes. You risk becoming hollow, strong on the outside, dead within. Machiavelli would not ask you to feel more, but he would advise you to manage your inner state as carefully as your external image. Because when the center breaks, even the illusion of power cannot save you. The fall will be swift and irreversible. So what is the solution? Not to become weak, but to learn to break intelligently. Find the hidden corners of your life where collapse is safe. Choose moments of solitude, not only to endure, but to regenerate. Create rituals not of escape, but of control, because that is what strength truly is. Not the absence of collapse, but the mastery of it. The ability to determine the time, the place, the method. You fall on your terms. You bleed where no one looks. You scream only in places where echoes do not escape. The modern world romanticizes vulnerability, but Machiavelli would urge caution. Vulnerability is currency, and it devalues quickly in the wrong market. Be vulnerable only with those who have earned the right to see you unguarded, and even then, do it with intention. Do not bleed for attention. Bleed, if you must, to heal in silence. And when you return, stronger, sharper, more composed, no one needs to know what it cost you. Let them believe the myth. Let them think you never broke. That is power. That is virtue in the end. All men fall, but not all men rise again. The difference lies in how the fall is managed. The strong collapse in silence, not out of pride, but out of strategy. They know that the world does not slow down to cradle them. They must slow themselves down, rebuild from within, and re-enter the arena wearing the same mask but with new fire behind the eyes. Machiavelli never promised peace. He promised clarity. And the clarity is this: in a brutal world, your collapse is your responsibility. No one is coming to save you. You are the architect of your recovery or the author of your extinction. Be brutal enough to hide your wounds, wise enough to tend to them, and strong enough to return when no one expected. You too. That is how the strong survive. That is how they win, quietly, invisibly, until the world is forced to reckon with them once more. And when the world finally does notice them again, it will not see the pain they endured, the nights they spent fighting invisible wars, or the silent choices that kept them alive. It will only see the result, the composed, calculating, impenetrable version of a man who seems untouched by suffering. That, too, is Machiavellian, to endure hell and return looking like you never left. Because appearances are not just a game, they are the battlefield. The strong man learns to master the performance. He knows that every gesture, every silence, every facial expression communicates power or weakness, and so he choreographs his return carefully. No apologies, no explanations, just presence. He shows up again as if nothing happened, not to pretend, but to reclaim control, because that's what collapsing in silence allows: the opportunity to reappear on your own terms, not dragged back by sympathy or shame. There's a kind of spiritual violence in this form of strength. It cuts off the luxury of being understood. The strong do not get to be known fully. They must live behind armor, always calculating how much to show, always hiding the fracture lines. And yet, this is not only a burden, it is a kind of freedom. Because when no one sees your collapse, no one defines your recovery. You become the sole author of your resurrection. And that is the ultimate form of power. But don't mistake silence for ease. It is excruciating. It takes more energy to suppress pain than to express it. The strong are often exhausted, not from what they've endured, but from the constant effort to appear unaffected. And this exhaustion accumulates over time. It makes them colder, more distant, harder to reach. People say they've changed. They haven't. They've simply adapted to survive. Adapted in the Machiavellian sense, because in a world that doesn't forgive weakness, adaptation is not just smart, it is essential. This is why many strong men seem emotionally unavailable. It's not because they lack depth, it's because they've built a dam around their emotions to keep from drowning. They've learned that their pain is not safe in other people's hands, so they hold it tightly, alone, and try to function anyway. And sometimes they succeed so well that even they forget how close they are to collapse again. That's the danger. When the mask fits too well, you start to believe it yourself. But sooner or later, the cracks resurface, the weight grows again, and the cycle begins anew. The strong collapse, rise, act, endure, and then collapse again. Quietly, always quietly, not because they're incapable of asking for help, but because they no longer believe it's coming. And in that disbelief, they find something stronger than comfort. They find resolve. Resolve to keep moving even if no one claps, to rebuild even if no one notices, to survive for reasons that are internal, not external. Machiavelli would argue that this is the essence of greatness: to act not for applause, not for validation, but for sovereignty over oneself. He wrote not for dreamers, but for survivors, not for saints, but for rulers. And in a world ruled by appearances, deception, and control, the man who collapses silently and rises strategically is not weak, he is untouchable. So what does it mean to be truly strong in a Machiavellian world? It means understanding that suffering is inevitable, but showing it is optional. It means becoming fluent in silence, patient in adversity, and ruthless in recovery. It means collapsing like a tactician, not a victim. And it means rising not for praise, but because staying down is not an option, even when no one sees it, even when there is no reward waiting at the end. The strong rise because they are at war with their own limits. Their strength is not theatrical. It is forged in the private chambers of despair and sharpened in the cold hours of solitude. It is the strength of the unseen battle, the victory that happens in the dark dot. And if you recognize yourself in this, know that your silence is not empty. It is sacred. It is your strategy. You are not broken because you fall. You are powerful because you rise without permission, without fanfare, without anyone needing to know how close you came to disappearing. That is the Machiavellian truth of the strong man. He collapses, but never visibly, never foolishly, never without a plan. His pain is real, but his response is calculated. His suffering is deep, but his discipline is deeper. And in a world that thrives on weakness disguised as virtue, that kind of strength is rare, unseen, misunderstood, but unstoppable. So collapse, if you must, but do it in silence, and rise again when the time is right, not to be noticed, not to be loved, but to take back what is yours. Not even the collapse of the strong is wasted. It is preparation, it is purification, it is strategy, it is war in disguise. And yet, for all its stoic majesty, this war, the inner collapse and calculated resurrection of the strong, leaves scars that no one will ever praise. The strong do not seek comfort in sharing those wounds because they know the world only respects the illusion of invincibility. That is the cruel irony Machiavelli understood. The more you show you can handle, the more you will be forced to carry. The stronger you appear, the more invisible your suffering becomes. You are not rewarded for surviving. You are punished with greater burdens. This is why the strongest often feel the most alone. Not because they lack relationships, but because those relationships rely on their strength. Their identity has become intertwined with reliability, composure, stability. They are the anchor others tie themselves to during storms, never asking whether that anchor is corroding beneath the waves. And the moment the strong stumble, they don't just risk personal failure, they risk the disintegration of everyone who leaned on them. This is why they collapse in silence. They know too much depends on the illusion that they're still standing tall. Machiavelli would not call this deception cruel. He would call it necessary. He taught that the maintenance of power requires artifice, not authenticity. A ruler must appear merciful, honest, religious even when he is not, because perception controls behavior. And so too must the strong man appear composed, unshakable, confident even when his soul is burning. Because if others see the fire, they panic, they lose trust. And in Machiavelli's world, trust is more dangerous than love. It can vanish in an instant, replaced by fear or contempt. So the strong master the art of balance internally, chaos externally, control. They learn to split themselves into two versions, the one that bleeds and the one that leads, the one that doubts and the one that commands. They may be breaking inside, but their eyes remain steady. Their voice remains calm. They do not ask for help, not because they believe they don't need it, but because they understand help, when given out of pity, undermines the very identity they've spent a lifetime building. And yet, if you look closely, you'll see it. The small signs, the late replies, the quieter tone, the smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. These are the cracks in the mask, not signs of weakness, but proof of humanity. Even the strongest cannot carry everything forever. They just try longer than most. But the human soul was not designed to be bulletproof. It was designed to endure, to adapt, to break and heal, sooner or later. Even the strong must learn that silence is not the same as strength if it leads to isolation. Without purpose, Machiavelli would warn them, collapse strategically, yes, but never collapse so fully that you cannot return. Never disappear so deeply into your pain that you lose your grip on your plan. The fall is only useful if it is temporary. There's no glory in being consumed by your own strength. Let your silence serve your rebirth, not your annihilation. That is the tightrope the strong must walk. On one side, the temptation to scream, to finally let it all out. On the other, the instinct to suppress everything until nothing remains. Neither extreme serves them. What serves them is discipline, not emotional repression, but emotional sovereignty. The ability to choose when to feel, when to reveal, and when to conceal. The understanding that emotions are powerful and thus must be wielded like weapons, not poured out like weakness. And in the quiet hours, when no one is watching, the strong man makes a decision to keep going, to rebuild, not for applause, not for sympathy, but because he has seen the edge and returned. Because deep inside, under the armor and strategy, is a fire no collapse can extinguish, a will that bends but does not break, a purpose that survives even silence. This is what it means to be truly strong in a Machiavellian world. Not to be fearless, but to continue in spite of fear. Not to be emotionless, but to rule over emotion like a king rules over a kingdom. Not to be unbreakable, but to be unkillable in spirit. The collapse is part of the path, but it must be a chapter, not the end. And so the strong man rises again, quietly, without spectacle, with the same tired eyes, the same steady hands, the same sharpened mind. But something inside him is different. He has walked through his own ruin and taken notes. He has tasted despair and spit it out like poison. He has died a small death and returned more dangerous. He smiles again, not because the pain is gone, but because he now owns it, controls it, wears it like a crown no one else can see. That is the true strength Machiavelli spoke of, not dominance over others, but dominion over oneself. The inner empire, never conquered, even when burning. And in the end, that's all that remains. No applause, no recognition, just the quiet knowledge that you survived the collapse no one saw and rose from it with no one's permission. A man, forged in silence, built in the shadows, unmade and remade without a witness. That is what the strong become, and no one ever sees it coming. Because by the time they do see it, by the time the strong man returns, he is already something else entirely, no longer driven by the need to prove, to explain, to justify. He has stepped beyond all of that. What emerges from that silent collapse is not simply a man who has healed, it is a man who has been reforged, sharper, colder, more precise, detached from the approval of others, immune to their expectations, and completely aligned with a mission that no longer requires permission. The strong man returns as a sovereign, not of others, but of himself. This, Machiavelli would argue, is the highest form of power, the ability to rule your own nature, to bend your own will, to navigate your inner storms without collapsing publicly. It's not that the strong have fewer emotions, they often feel more deeply than most, but they do not hand their emotions to the world to be judged, pitied, or misunderstood. They carry them with the dignity of a hidden sword, unsheathed only when absolutely necessary. And while others may live in cycles of confession and catharsis, looking for healing in exposure, the strong find their healing in silence, in action, in choosing, every day, to continue forward when it would be easier to stop. Their collapse becomes fuel. The fire that consumed them is repurposed into forward motion. It's not forgiveness they seek, it's clarity, not comfort but understanding. They do not waste time asking why life dealt them hardship. They ask, what now? And move. That movement, silent, unstoppable, deliberate, is what separates them. While others speak of growth, the strong live it, alone, without affirmation. They do not journal their pain, they weaponize it. They turn rejection into indifference. They turn humiliation into resolve. They take loss, betrayal, failure and bury it deep within until it no longer burns, but solidifies into a foundation. Beneath their feet, a foundation no one can shake, because no one knows it's there. Machiavelli would write that rulers should be both lion and fox, bold and clever, feared and respected. But there's another layer to this. They must also be invisible in their vulnerability, untouchable in their suffering. A man who collapses in public invites judgment. A man who collapses in private writes his own legend, not because he hides his truth, but because he controls its release. Power, after all, is not about dominance, it is about control. First of others, yes, but always, first and foremost, of yourself. And yet, the cost is real. The strong rarely get to be fully known, because the parts they protect the most, the moments of agony, the nights of despair, the secrets of collapse, are also the parts that would humanize them. But they choose distance over vulnerability, mystery over exposure, respect over sympathy. Because once you are seen in your weakest moment, it is nearly impossible to be seen as anything else. The image stains, and the strong cannot afford to be stained. But there is a strange kind of peace in that sacrifice, in not needing to be understood. in not craving to be saved, in knowing that your strength is not dependent on anything external, not praise, not love, not validation. That, in itself, is liberation. It is the final reward of the strong man's silent collapse, the realization that he is entirely self-sufficient, that he can endure ruin and build again without a hand to hold or a voice to guide him. And if, by some rare chance, he finds someone who sees him fully, who can witness his cracks and not fear them, who respects the mask but understands the man beneath it, then perhaps he lets himself rest for a moment. Perhaps, but even then, the instinct remains. The instinct to guard, to protect the most sacred parts of himself, because he knows how the world works, and he would rather be alone than misread, rather be silent than misunderstood, rather be feared than pitied. So he continues, with scars that don't show, with memories he never speaks of, with lessons written not in books, but in bruises no one sees. And when the next collapse comes, as it always does, he will meet it not with panic, but with preparation, not as a victim, but as a strategist, because this is not the end. It never is. The strong do not collapse once and learn forever. They collapse many times, quietly, invisibly, but they always rise. Stronger, smarter, harder to break. And no one ever sees it coming because no one saw them fall.